I'd like to take just a minute to go over some of the details about this introduction and why they're relevant. Some of these things will really help you out. As I explain these, this does not mean you have to do these, but I want you to understand the rationale behind it. That way you can make a conscious choice as to how you present this and what you expect to play out. The bottom line is alter the activity however you choose and you think will be most effective, but I'd like you to do that as a conscious choice as opposed to this is the way I learned it and that's by default the way I'm going to do it. So this is meant to help educate you on some of the ideas. First of all, if you have to reset the activity yourself, one of the things you'll notice here, even though we only have 4 boxes, is that we laid it out in a linear fashion. This is very important because if you distribute the boxes randomly around the circle, which is actually one of the best solutions, you're actually setting them up for success, which means if they decide, which is a great strategy, let's try it the way it is to see if it works, and then we'll go from there. Well, if you have them scattered out around the circle, they probably will succeed the first time. If you do it linearly like this, there's less of a chance of them succeeding. And here are a couple reasons why. Ideally, you want a cluster of boxes, push them all together in the center, and then have 1 or 2 paths leading in. Each path being a decent step, but not a real long step. That way, by pushing them together, if you think about it, the human body, the feet are narrower, so you can get more feet on the box, but our shoulders are wide, so we'll end up being real broad at the top, and we'll tend to topple over. So the ideal distribution is to spread everything out about a leg's width apart, which allows people to stand in between boxes as well as on top of boxes. My point is if you have to reset, work on having a cluster in the center and then at least 2 entryways. And I wouldn't go more than 2 because, again, that spreads the boxes out. The other thing that's very important is if you notice, during the introduction, I actually lifted up a box to demonstrate moving it. I think demonstration is very important. The same reason I like to stand on top of a box. It gives a perception. But one thing that's very important is to pay attention to where your hidden box is. Because the last thing you want to do during your introduction is saying, oh, by the way, if you're going to move a box, you've just given it away. With the hidden box in mind also, personally, I like to try to position it where I think they may not move it. That way, at the end of the activity, if they haven't exposed it yet during the debrief, toward the end of the debrief, you can say, by the way, I'd like you to consider one last thing. You can come over and lift up the box and just ask, would that have helped you at all? The idea being that you cannot uncover hidden resources until you move to action and you try things. Just by thinking about it, you won't find them. It only comes from action, which is another great part of the debrief, is the balance between action and planning. A couple other things I want you to pay attention to is the verbiage I used. When I said each box could be repositioned in the circle 1 time, I did that for a reason, because if you say each box can be moved 1 time, what that says is once you take it out of the circle, regardless of where you put it down, it's stuck. But if you say repositioned in the circle 1 time, what it does is allows them to take these boxes outside of the circle, practice as much as they want, and then commit to the location in the circle when they're done practicing. So the point is by setting up that verbiage, it allows them the opportunity to do something else, which is practice or prototyping it outside of the circle. So that comes in really handy. The other thing you'll notice I said is I made a point of saying that the circle cannot be moved. And actually, I take that back. I think I forgot to say that. But what I would keep in mind is if they ask about the circle, I would tell them no, that is the MBA program is an established program. It's fixed. That's one of the constraints they have to work with. Oh, by the way, the other point I would make is if they choose to take the boxes out of the circle, or if you choose to bring that up during the debrief, asking them, could you have taken them out of the circle? The main point there is that most of us create an assumption that the rope becomes a permanent boundary, and we cannot remove resources from that boundary. So we create our own limitations, whereas there was nothing in the instructions saying you couldn't take them outside of the circle. So very, very interesting. The other thing that's interesting too, the great debrief point, is if they find the hidden box, typically what you'll find is as soon as they find it, they'll start looking underneath of all of the other boxes for resources. There's a spike of energy. I would tie that back to their business world. In the context of, from a leader's perspective, if you uncover a hidden resource in someone, all of a sudden it can spread like wildfire with other people looking for hidden resources as well. That's exactly what you want in your work environment. Other than keep in mind is if they are looking for resources, if they lift up a box, there's nothing under it, and they put it back down, it is stuck. If they slide a box, just like I said, it is stuck. Okay, so I'd be very strict about that. You also notice from a safety standpoint, I said keep your shoes on. Taking shoes off, it's just a very difficult situation to monitor. I like to set that up from the start. As far as the safety aspect of boxes sliding, even here on the carpet, you can tell it does slide a little bit, not bad. Carpets are great, but if you're on a hard floor, they will slide. What I would recommend from a facilitation standpoint or spotting standpoint is if someone is stepping for this box, the first person only, I usually try to put my foot on the inside side of it so it won't slide. Again, if they're coming in from multiple sides, you may not be able to do that for everyone. If you have the opportunity, that is a great way of keeping it from sliding. As I mentioned during the introduction, as soon as one person's on a box, it won't slide because you have enough weight onto it. So that works very, very well. Remember, safety-wise, no shoulders. As people are starting to get up, you will notice that sometimes they tend to topple over a little bit. A lot of times I will tell the group, look, if you're losing your balance, step down. It's only an activity. Okay, we don't want anybody to get hurt. I'll tell them that point blank. As far as a spotting standpoint, if people are getting up on the outside, just wander around the group with your hands up. Watch for the weakest points. That's where you try to position yourself. Toward the end, I strongly recommend having everyone count together. If you only have one person saying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I usually say, no, I need everybody to count. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I put it back on them. Because what it does is it creates an ending to the activity. It comes into like a crescendo. So I urge you to really put that responsibility back onto them to close the activity. One last thing, as far as a debrief point, I'd urge you to look for is a lot of times there'll be one person running around the circle at the end trying to find a spot, and they can't find a spot in the circle. And finally, they end up just jumping into the group, and the group sort of engulfs them and keeps them from falling. The idea being that even though they are uncomfortable, they're being held in place by the group. To me, that image is exactly what we're trying to create. So I'll come back to the imagery. I even tell them this. I want them to think about that end point where everybody was pulling together and holding together, and the group as a whole was stable. Even though some individuals on the outside felt off balance, some people on the inside felt uncomfortable, but they were successful and they were stable. They were able to withstand a lot of change from the outside. That's what they want to create, not just as a learning team, but as a cluster, as a class, as an entire community. So I use the analogy that each box can represent a learning team, but to be stable, to get the most out of this experience, you want to link between those teams. You want to link between the classes. You want to link between every resource possible at school. That's what builds a strong community. So all of those pieces, I think, provide some very valid debrief points. Oh, and the last thing too about jumping on from the outside, I usually create that imagery for them as well, that you had one person that literally couldn't find a spot. As they jumped up, these hands just emerged from the group and held them in. Nobody was looking for acknowledgement. Everybody was just doing what they needed to do to succeed. They were willing to extend themselves for others. They were willing to help one another. So to me, it has lessons that, just lessons after lessons that are very effective for the group. Great activity. I think you'll have a great time with it. A lot of points you can pull out of it. Take care.